On today's show, the Brooklyn Nets waive Cam Thomas, ending his 5-year tenure with the team. What led to the two sides splitting, and who is to blame for the outcome? I'll answer that on today's episode of Locked On Nets.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to Locked On Nets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, the number one sports podcast network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. And on today's episode, the NBA trade deadline passed, and the Nets' most significant decision was not a trade, but it was that they waived Cam Thomas. So I got Lucas Kaplan coming on the show. We're going to break down everything that went into that decision, and we're also just going to reflect on Cam Thomas's tenure and what we think the future could hold for him. Let's go. And joining the show now, we got Lucas Kaplan of Nets Daily. And Lucas, we got a pseudo emergency pod because one of the most noteworthy, at least to the fan base, players of the last few years for the Nets, since the stars have departed at least, has been Cam Thomas. And the Nets decided to waive Cam Thomas today. It is the ending of a 5-year partnership, I guess you could call it, but it seems like there was often different agendas. And my, reaction to this before throwing it off to you, I'm not surprised that obviously this came to a point where they're splitting. The fact that he got waived, not shocked, maybe somewhat surprised, but we all knew that the writing was on the wall after he, failed to agree to a contract extension, signed the QO this summer. We knew he wasn't going to be a part of the team's future, and that was reflected in the lack of urgency that the Nets showed to lock him up on any sort of long-term contract. I mean, they essentially only offered him 1-year contracts. We can get into that in a little bit, but it was clear he wasn't a part of the future. And that really shouldn't be all that surprising when you look at the things that the Nets are prioritizing in the draft, the way that they've said they want to play. And look, I know that a large section of the Nets fan base, a lot of NBA fans in general, are very tantalized by Cam Thomas's scoring ability. And it's understandable why, because he's one of the most talented scorers in the NBA. He makes shots that just make you almost spit out your coffee. That's ridiculous. But we all know that he just hasn't really shown any development in any area outside of scoring. He remains extremely limited as a, defender, rebounder, passer, and his lack of development in those areas, that's really a black mark on him, in my opinion, because, the Nets gave him opportunities, they gave him the reins somewhat the last 2.5 seasons, and they wanted to see what he could develop into, and he didn't really show any significant strides in those areas. And I think that's evident by, the Nets not offering him a significant deal and how limited the market was around him, around the league for him in terms of free agency and trades. So, I'd like to say that it's on the Nets as well. The fact that they didn't get more out of this partnership. And I think that is partially true because they couldn't get him to buy into certain things and playing a different way. But it's clear they tried, with several different head coaches at several steps. And at the end of the day, a player might just have certain limitations and you might just not be able to get through to him. And it seems like that happened here. And unfortunately, it ends in a really talented player not really bearing any real fruit for this Nets team that drafted him at the very end of the first round. But Cam Thomas gone. How you feeling?
The one thing that we always heard was that the organization, especially the front office, always really liked him. I remember, talking to people and hearing things like, no, we really like him and his personality. There were some awkward moments at the beginning, especially under Steve Nash, especially when anybody asked about his defense. And all you heard was, man, we love Cam. Genuinely, he's just maybe a little bit of an awkward kid right now, but we have no worries about any of that stuff. And so I wouldn't say this has been building for his whole tenure in terms of between him and the organization. He certainly had problems with, disagreements with Jacques Vaughn and Steve Nash, right? But it didn't feel like that extended to the top down. And it's how crazy is it to think about now? The Nets offered him a bigger contract in July than they offered Day'Ron Sharpe.
Yeah, that is kind of wild, honestly, to think about that. And yeah, I honestly don't know what to make of that, other than they were maybe trying to use Cam as like a human trade exception. But yeah, strange.
And I think, listen, they didn't offer him $20 million over 2 just to trade him, right?
It was
would think
$30 million over 2.
Oh, okay.
30 million,
Yeah. Okay, we've reported 30 million. I mean, listen, it's tough to know everything that goes on behind the scenes, and there are like a lot of different lanes with Cam I want to talk about, but I think the one thing that we've kind of heard about him and we know to be true is that he may not be always getting the best advice. And there's a thin line between betting on yourself and throwing money and opportunities away. And it just from the outside looking in, it feels like Cam hasn't always had the right short-term perception of himself in terms of how he can help a team. And over this past year, it feels like he hasn't always had the greatest long-term perception of himself either in terms of his standing around the league, his standing, among other organizations. But maybe he really was okay with this outcome. Maybe he really just wanted to get out of Brooklyn. And I have a tough time believing that given all the money he forfeited, but who's to say? I mean, who's to say? We know he didn't want to be here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, on your point that you just made prior to that about him not having a great grasp on, short-term and long-term things that maybe he needed to do. I've said it when speaking about Cam. I think everybody who listens to this show knows my stance on, him as a player. I just think that one of the greatest assets you need in an athlete is self-awareness. I mean, you need to know what you need to improve on. You need to be willing to take that, long, hard look in the mirror. And Cam Thomas just doesn't seem like a player who's been willing to do that. I mean, I've asked him at numerous points about, the shortcomings in his game that obviously have been a sticking point with the Nets and around the league. And he just continually says, I'm going to do what I do. I'm not going to change the way I play. And it's like, okay, that leads you to this situation where you're getting waived and nobody around the league really has significant interest in him, it seems. So it just seems like, as you said, I think he's getting some bad advice too. Like, he's changed agents 3 times in the last year. So obviously like that plays a role in it. And I think like, Cam's personality, like he has a huge chip on his shoulder. And it just seems like he's been a very talented scorer, obviously, like one of the more talented scorers that you're going to see at any level. But because of his other shortcomings, that led to him falling in the draft. That led to him not getting the contract he wanted. That led to him, a lot of people focusing on his shortcomings rather than his abilities. And it seems like all of that has kind of just like, he's kind of internalized all of that. And it's kind of, gotten to a point where like he's, instead of like accepting that, he's a little bit defensive about it. And he's just continued to trend in one direction. I'm not going to say that he hasn't made any improvements, but like, it's not that much different the way that he plays or approaches the game or talks about the game now compared to when he came into the league, which is interesting given all the discourse that has come, about. And just talking about like the contract situation, I mean, I said it when he turned down the 2-year, $30 million contract which had a team option in the second year. So basically a 1-year, $15 million deal is what I'd say it was. But I said I thought that was a big financial mistake at the time, and it's looking like, disastrous decision. That might be strong, but like it could be a disastrous decision because I just don't know, like, what's he going to get this offseason? I mean, he just doesn't have a market right now. He's getting waived by a team during a contract year.
I mean, what playoff team can you really envision folding him into their playoff rotation? By the way, one moment of self-awareness when he gave a quote to Mark Spears today about his future. He said, "My next team is getting an elite scorer and a good playmaker." So that in itself was a moment of clarity.
And he mentioned a defense in that quote.
He didn't oversell himself. He said a great combo guard. But he's certainly improved, and there's some stuff I want to talk about with his hamstring and the physical changes he went through in the last 4 or 5 years. And honestly, that ties into a broader conversation about the modern NBA. Like, guys are getting, I don't want to say cooked, but severely like hampered in their athleticism from their teens to their mid-20s when they're supposed to be hitting their athletic prime, like Ja, Trey, Cam, maybe Darius Garland. That really messed up Cam. I guess we could talk about, I could say it now. Like, there was a play against the Lakers. He couldn't get by Luka, and he caught it on the catch, and he settled for, I mean, it's Cam, so I don't know about settling, a step back 20-footer, like just inside the arc over Luka. This guy used to be like really quick, and he would often use that quickness to separate for like jumpers and fadeaways. But that's another part of this where his effectiveness has, I think, really been challenged by the fact that he just like can't get to the rim a lot anymore. He's a slower, less bursty player than he was in his first couple years in the league. He really sacrificed a lot of that to get bigger. And sure, the foul drawing has gone up, but maybe that's a way to try to survive on defense a little more. But I feel like that is, when you talk about the story of his at least on-court production, is something I'm going to be thinking about for a while and kind of wondering what would have happened if that went differently.
Yeah, because we've spoken about it. If you're going to have the playmaking limitations and the defensive limitations that he has, you have to be such a hyper-efficient, high-level scorer to justify that kind of things. I mean, I don't know if Cam Thomas was ever going to get there because he's just like such a bad defender, and the playmaking, even if it's shown steps, has been limited. But like, yeah, the lack of burst, some of the things that we've seen from him as of late amid those hamstring issues certainly haven't helped. And like we spoke with him about, him gaining a lot of weight, putting on a lot of muscle. Like at certain points, like he looks like a football player out there, and he's lost some weight going into this season, but had another hamstring injury. And, some of that stuff seems like it has lingered. But I do want to talk about the fact that the Nets waived Cam Thomas. They weren't even able to find a trade for him. He did have a no trade clause. So I want to get into what led to that outcome, them waiving him instead of trading him. And something you touched on, like, what does this overall say about the league, the fact that Cam Thomas has had such a limited market despite his scoring ability? So we'll get into all that when we continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. Guys, hiring isn't just about finding someone willing to take the job. It's about finding the right person with the right background who can actually help your business move forward. And if you want candidates who match what you're looking for, Indeed Sponsored Jobs is the move. Because instead of hoping the right person stumbles across your post, Indeed helps you match with qualified candidates by boosting your job listing to the people who fit your specific criteria, like skills, certification, and location. If I were hiring, I wouldn't just want someone who can help. I'd want someone with real experience who can jump right in. That's what you'll like about Indeed. You can get specific and target exactly what you need. It saves time because you're spending less energy sorting through mismatches. And with Sponsored Jobs, your post gets seen by candidates who are actually a fit. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time spending and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Listeners to this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Guys, tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointments today. Coming back from the break, continuing today's Locked On Nets episode with Lucas Kaplan, talking about Cam Thomas, who was waived by the Nets about 2 hours ago. News of that came in, and waived by the Nets. Not even a trade, which, at certain points, like when Cam Thomas was averaging 25 points a game for extended stretches at one point, like the idea of waiving him and not getting anything for him seemed like it would be somewhat ridiculous. And now we're at a point where he's waived. And with him taking the qualifying offer this summer, he had a no trade clause. And the Nets offered him 2 deals that were essentially almost, it seemed like, bribing him to waive the no trade clause, because they offered him what was effectively, the 2-year deal, but it had a team option, a 1-year, $15 million contract if you assume they were going to decline that team option. And they also offered him a 1-year, $9.5 million contract that would have required him to waive the no trade clause. He said both of those. He said no to both of those to retain the no trade clause. And now they're waiving him. And I've seen kind of like people on both ends of the argument of saying, like, oh, they waived him instead of trading him. He had no value. And then there's people who are saying, well, he had a no trade clause, so maybe he wouldn't agree to a trade. So I think that you can look at it in a number of ways, but I will say that I do think the Nets held the leverage in this situation because, if they were going to get anything of real value for him and, say Cam didn't want to go to that team first, if a team was going to give anything of real value for Cam, you'd think he would want to go to that team because that would signal that they value him somewhat and they could see him having some kind of a role. But if he didn't want to go to that team, the Nets could have just said, well, we're not going to waive you. You're just going to sit on the bench during a contract season, which he wasn't going to do. So I do think he has the leverage. My read on this situation, I don't think that any team really valued him to a point around the league where they were going to give up any kind of like real asset, even a good second round pick for him. And I think that says a lot, about him off the heels of a free agency where he didn't really generate any interest either. But what is your read on the situation? The Nets waiving him instead of trading him.
Bro, off the heels of a season where he averaged 24 points. Like, I think we lose sight of how weird this must seem to the rest of the league and like other fans. But okay, he only played 25 games last year with the hamstring stuff, right? And that was another reason why he maybe should have taken the money when it was there, because he's had another hamstring injury this year. He averaged 24 last year and 4 assists. And the year before that, if you want to like get into a bigger sample, he averaged 22 points a game, and he played like 50 something games. It's really mind boggling if you just look at it like that this guy, teams didn't even want to give up a second round pick. And I don't like pretend to know Cam behind the scenes and spend a lot of time with him. I'm certainly aware of kind of his circle and the agents changing and maybe the advice that he gets, right? And general stubbornness. And we've said for a long time, this dude is too talented to not be part of a real rotation and to not at least, this is before this season, I was like, look at a guy like Norm Powell. You are such a good catch and shoot 3-point shooter. These are such efficient shots for you. You can attack off the closeout. Like, you may not be getting Shea Gilgeous-Alexander usage, but there's no way that you can't be a nice ancillary offensive piece for some bench units, which is something that a team would give up a second round pick for. It's really a lot about the way he is perceived around the league, because it's tough to just look at this and not come to the conclusion that teams view him as a malcontent, as tough to coach. And like, it feels so slimy to say these things sometimes for me, like to make personal judgments or non-basketball judgments about a guy I don't know. But when you think about all the noise and when you think about the fact that the consensus, as Zach Lowe might say, has told Cam that he's not worth a second round pick on an expiring, cheap deal, you just have to start thinking beyond, just basketball. Because as much as there is to nitpick about his game, I don't think that the 24 a night score is just gone completely. And I can only imagine like kind of what front offices and coaching staffs are saying about adding him into like a vibe, into a team that is, striving for a goal to go deep in the playoffs, how he might feel if he gets yanked, how he might feel like about a coach demanding that he give it his all to like defense and what he can do on that end. It's just going to be tough for him to climb back from this reputation wise, I think. And we heard it with a report today about DeMar, and it's totally true. Agents don't like when their guys take minimums because it's hard to get out of minimum land, and it's going to be hard for Cam to do that. And I feel bad for him.
That's why, I want to get into a number of things you said, but that's why I think that the counsel that he was getting and the decision-making that he made in the offseason with the contracts, it was just a mind-boggling decision, in my opinion, for several reasons. First, you got offered $15 million that get to go in your pocket, guaranteed, and instead you turn it down to bet on yourself to go into a season where you're just coming off 3 hamstring injuries, and also go into a season, once you sign the QO, the Nets really didn't have any incentive to like really commit to him, which is going to further limit your market and potentially put you in a situation like the one he ended up in. So I think that was just terrible advice. And I think that's, he changed agents like after he made that decision. So I'm not sure whether that was their counsel, how much, I think it was a little bit of both probably, but bad decision. And then what you said about like his perception, the perception of him around the league, like, I think we know this about Cam, like his personality, it's pretty standoffish. And like, you don't have to be a body language doctor to watch Cam Thomas during games, to watch him, after he got moved to the bench down the stretch of the season when the Nets are winning a couple games and he's just like going straight to the locker room right after the buzzer, when he's like sitting on the bench while a lot of other people are standing up for a big play at the end of a game while he's checking out, and he's just not good body language. It just seemed like a bad situation. What you said about, maybe him being tough to coach, like we went through 3 coaches. I mean, we went through Steve Nash, who like didn't play him that much, which it was understandable because he was a young player who was a score first guy. And the Nets had Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden. But then we got into Jacque Vaughn. The Nets traded KD, Kyrie, Harden. They had a desperate need for scoring. Jacque Vaughn still didn't want to play him. I asked him about that like probably 10 different times throughout that season. And every time he said, 40 points are great. You don't win that way without other people, getting involved. You need defense. You need playmaking. Cam didn't really make that much of an adjustment. Jordy Fernandez comes in. What has Jordy Fernandez said several times when we've asked him about it? You asked him about it one time recently, and Jordy said, the scoring's great. I need more defense. I need more playmaking. So it's like this messaging has been consistent across different head coaches. And Cam, I think, maybe in spurts has made an effort to make adjustments, but in the grand scheme of things, he's a very similar player to the one he was when he came into the league. And I think that is kind of an indictment of the way that he's been approaching the game.
But I will always go back to those last 2 games he played last season before the last injury kind of took him out for the season, the last hamstring injury. Yeah, in Cleveland and in Chicago, he was really efficient with his usage. It was all downhill. It was like pretty selfless and pretty proactive playmaking reads, like getting down the hill and pick and roll. And that's what's frustrating is we've seen it. It's not like he doesn't understand or can't process at all, like pick and roll spacing, what he has to do to become, a more effective player, to maybe stop getting doubled because he's consistently making the right play. And this is, I think, what has really probably driven his coaches crazy is that it's great that he was so awesome in those games last year against Chicago and Cleveland. I think he had double-digit assists or close to it both times. He didn't even shoot efficiently, but it was also like he wasn't taking a lot of tough shots until the very ends of those games, and they were down. Like, I just thought he had great process. But you can't have great process as if you're getting 30% usage. It can't be like, okay, if I'm getting the rock the whole game and bringing it up, then I will get off the ball quickly. I will react to doubles quickly. I'll make sure, I look for the lift shooter if it's drop coverage and the guy comes over or whatever. Like, it has to be all the time. And I think after 5 years, it's just not happening in Brooklyn. It was not going to happen in Brooklyn. And I'm just cautioning Nets fans for the first time he has 35 points and 11 assists in another uniform. Because that's the frustrating thing. Like, I've seen it. I've seen him really do the things that you want him to do, or at least take real steps and like hunt, catch, and shoot threes. He's an incredible shot-making talent. I don't know if it was just the situation. I don't know if it's one of those things that like, he has to get older and just, you learn with age, you become wiser, as we all do. But that was really one of the things that I'll think about is like, we've seen it, which is why I'm extending an olive branch to Nets fans. I get it. It's tough to give up on a guy like this that scored 3 straight 40-point games as like a 21-year-old or whatever he was, that has had moments of look at the playmaking, look at the decision-making, look at the talent, look at him help us win games. It's tough to give up on that, but it wasn't happening here.
Yeah, and you said you don't know why that is or whatever. I mean, or you don't know like why he hasn't made some of these changes. And like my rationale for it is that Cam views himself a certain way. I asked him at the end of last season if he felt he had done enough to secure a long-term contract and a long-term role with the Nets. And he said, absolutely. I feel like I'm one of the best guards in the league at my position when I'm healthy. He thinks that he is a star face of the NBA type talent. Like that's what he is. That's great. Yeah, like, that's fine. But the other thing that I'm going to throw into that is with his limitations, with how bad he is defensively, with the limitations that he has as a playmaker, which he could change his process as much as he wants. I just think that he has some playmaking limitations. With those two things, he's not, in my opinion, he's not the level of scorer, in terms of his size, his efficiency, that was going to warrant the kind of usage rate that you're talking about. And you said he only plays, not only, but he usually, when he has that kind of usage, is when you saw the spurts of engagement. And he's just not going to get that. Like, I just don't think that he's the level of player to warrant that in today's NBA, especially with how big the league is getting and with, some of the changes that teams are making. I just don't think that was going to happen. And with that not happening, I don't think Cam was ever going to come off that viewpoint of himself that he deserves that or that he's one of those guys. And that's a bad combination. And now this is like, if you're talking about a wake-up call, like this is as good of a wake-up call as you're ever going to get. A team not giving you any kind of real long-term offer, a team waiving you, teams around the league not having interest in you. So is this finally enough to get him to reevaluate that? We'll see. But I want to talk about that more in the final segment. I also want to talk about, what does this say about the league? What could his future look like? Maybe a few potential destinations. So we'll get into all that when we close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. Guys, it's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode with Lucas Kaplan talking about Cam Thomas. And Lucas, we just touched on the reasons that we think it didn't work out for Cam, and the reasons that, we think there hasn't been a lot of interest in the league surrounding his skill set, despite him being this just electrifying scorer in spurts. And I think this is just continuing a theme of what we've said of, score first, undersized guards who aren't, very good defenders, or, who are bad defenders or not good playmakers. The NBA is just trending further and away from that archetype. And it seems like, Cam has kind of fit that to a T. So, when you just assess the league and assess the limited market that Cam has had, like, what is your takeaway from just like the way that where the league is trending and what this says about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what we talked about in the summer. The Jamal Crawford, Lou Williams idea of like the spark plug score, as I've said many times on here, isn't how the league operates a lot anymore. It's not like you bring a guy in and here's the keys to the offense. You got to be able to like mix and match. When you think about, like NFL teams and running backs, it's no longer just here's all the usage to one guy. It's like, well, you want to be able to have a really good pass blocker, and you want to be able to have a really good between the tackles guy and an outside guy. And guess what? If a guy can do all of those things, that's what makes him a really special running back. That's kind of how I think about like bench players and NBA lineups. It's like, you're not just going to bring a guy in to run the show. We talked about it with the Pacers last year. They could mix and match and have funky lineups, but it's not like when they brought Obi Toppin in off the bench, or, Neesmith. I guess Neesmith started, or Mathurin, or whoever, McConnell. It wasn't always just like, okay, run the show. And Cam, it feels like he does have ancillary skills, like catch and shooting, off-ball offense. It feels like it can be all there, but it's hard for a team to give the keys to a guy that is a league average scorer in terms of efficiency, even though he can get to tough shots. And even if he plays the right way all the time, like you said, he's not going to be John Stockton or Steve Nash out there, just with some of the issues he's had creating space, seeing over doubles. And, he's not, even when he's totally engaged, not the quickest floor processor in the world. So it's just a lot of things are kind of going against him in terms of the way that the NBA is going. I think we've been saying that for a while.
Yeah, the NBA is it's trending away from like one-dimensional players. I mean, you just don't really see it. I mean, you see guys who have very varied skill sets who can do some things. And yeah, like you said, I mean, just with Cam, I think that there were, limitations in some of those areas, and we'll see if he can improve those. I mean, something that has just been like jarring to me, like you talk about like just playmaking ability or like the process that he plays with. I mean, you look at a guy like Nolan Traore, who's like a little bit bigger than Cam, a little bit lankier than Cam, but like, how many times have we seen already in Nolan's like young rookie season, him like driving and making these skip passes over two defenders, or like manipulating the defense and finding shooters across the court, like really good live dribble reads. I mean, like Nolan's 19 years old. How many of those passes have you seen from Cam Thomas, like throughout his whole Nets tenure? Like you don't see it. And I think that that's obviously part of it is like a mindset. Also part of it is just his limitations. But yeah, I think just like the lack of versatility, I think hurts him. But maybe another coach can get him to buy into some things, maybe a different situation. Maybe this is a wake-up call. Maybe there's just a change of scenery is what he needed. I know the Milwaukee Bucks and the Cleveland Cavaliers are two of the teams that have at least shown some interest in him. That's from Hoops Hype's Michael Scotto, the resident insider here on this podcast. But those teams, other teams, do you have any destinations that you think would be interesting for Cam for the second half of this season?
Yeah, maybe those. Probably the Cavs more so, just because they might be forced to like play him in the playoffs if there's an injury or whatever. The Pistons, the fact that Jaden Ivey and Karis LeVert were in the rotation for so long, like, why not play Cam, who's better than both of those guys at kind of why you would play them? I just hope he starts to like help himself. I just want to say that he got to help himself wherever he goes. And like, it sucks. And I get it to play the game this way, but like you said, he doesn't help himself when he's moping on the bench. Like, other teams see that stuff on social media. When you ask him like, hey, you had a career high in assists tonight. Even if you feel this way, you can't just be like, I don't know. Yeah. Like, my teammates made shots. That was the difference. Like, I get it, man. It sucks to like play the game and brown nose and say things that you don't believe, but I want him to help himself a little bit more, and because he's, like I said, he's too talented. So wherever he goes, I hope that's something that changes a little bit. I don't mean to sound too condescending, but that stuff all makes a difference in your perception. But that being said, like, dream world, Pistons, right? I guess.
Yeah, he could kind of be like the Dennis Schroeder from last season. Obviously, like, Schroeder's a different player, but I feel like he could fill a similar role. And honestly, like, we've said this, like, the reason that I thought that it didn't really make much sense the way that Cam handled this was like the best way that he, I think, is going to improve the perception of him around the league and maybe get himself somewhat of a free agent market is making real contributions to like meaningful basketball for a team that has actual aspirations. So yeah, the Pistons would be an interesting team. I mean, we'll see how this all plays out. I think that Cam is obviously going to canvass the league for the best situation. I do think that there's some teams that will be interested. I mean, getting him on a prorated minimum salary for the rest of the season, like, why not add him? Unless you think that he's just going to be a complete malcontent and like be a distraction. I could see why maybe teams wouldn't want to add him in that case, but I think that this probably is a situation where he's going to go in with a better attitude because it's a contract season. I mean, like, at the end of the day, this is his last shot unless he wants to take another minimum contract next season. So we'll see how that all plays out, but that's Lucas. Lucas, that's all I got.
One question. What was your favorite moment of his Nets tenure?
Definitely the MSG win where, Cam Thomas, LaMarcus Aldridge just spamming pick and rolls and him just silencing the Garden. That was the moment where, like,
that was awesome.
A lot of Nets fans, I mean, that and the 3 straight 40-point games, but even more so the next game because they won it at the Garden. Like, that was the moment where a lot of people were like, oh, man, this kid might be something. And, like, not that he can't, but it's just unfortunate that it didn't play out. It didn't bear any fruit for the Nets. But yeah, that was my favorite moment. But Lucas, all I got with you here today. We got some other minor trades. I'm going to get into them on a coming pod, but Nets got the Magic. Then they got a few really important tank matchups coming up on the schedule. So we'll have coverage of all that and more when I got you back on here soon, but I appreciate taking the time as always. That does it for today's episode of Locked On Nets. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk with Lucas. If you do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy my content, take a second right now, smash that like button, leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. The Nets got a game against the Orlando Magic tonight. They also made a few trades that we're still awaiting final details on. So I have coverage of all that and more when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.